Awfully busy day in Columbus for the Ohio State Buckeyes. The coaching staff looks very different than it did 24 hours ago. Ryan Day with a couple of additions, a couple of guys that were told your services are no longer needed. In fact, there are a couple of coaches that were brought on board reportedly that won't be in on-field roles as well. 4 new faces in the building, 2 faces that Buckeye fans are familiar with are moving on. And Ohio State is taking very seriously its changes on the defensive side of the ball. We're going to dive into all that, plus the 2022 schedule changes we learned about within the last 24 hours. Same opponents, same venues for those games, but a very different looking schedule, including when the bye week shifted and who Ohio State opens Big Ten play with. It's all coming up next on Buckeye Breakdown. We've got the whole crew together as we cover Ohio State with our instant analysis from Ohio State.
There's something that doesn't feel right.
Unbelievable effort from him today. Is E.J. Liddell going to crack the first team all Big Ten?
I think he can be the guy. I'm not trying to start a quarterback controversy.
He seems to have the durability. He certainly has the toughness. This is the question on a lot of people's minds here. Welcome to Buckeye Breakdown. Well, hi, everybody, and happy Thursday evening. Alongside Andrew Lind, I'm Brendan Gulick. Welcome back to Buckeye Breakdown, where we continue to chat about Ohio State. Andrew, early in the offseason, but typically that means a pretty news-heavy time. I know a lot of people, you finish up the season. You had the national championship game, in fact, earlier this week, just a couple days ago. And a lot of people want to take a big, deep breath and exhale on what was a challenging, trying, occasionally frustrating, but often exciting season. You're emotionally worn down, and then bang, news flying left and right with coaching changes and transfer portal additions and lots going on with the Ohio State football program, despite the fact that they're not on the field. Why don't we start with the coaching staff departures? Kerry Coombs and Al Washington no longer with Ohio State.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy to think back, 2 years ago that those were really big parts of the staff, them bringing on Carrie as a defensive coordinator to replace Greg Madison. People were, kind of unsure about what he would bring as a defensive coordinator, but, you thought that the secondary would be in really good hands and then he would be an excellent recruiter. And then even like if you look at it back a year ago, Ohio State was doing everything they could to keep Al Washington from going to Tennessee and being the defensive coordinator there. And, then everything happened this year. The defense, continued to struggle. With Jim Knowles coming in, there's not really a spot for Washington anymore because Knowles is going to coach the linebackers. And then, with the staff additions, the other staff additions today, Carrie sees his way out too. And, there's a lot of excitement in terms of just who they're bringing in because there is a lot of experience there, new blood, that kind of stuff. Like it brings something new to the program that is kind of needed at this point. So, it's kind of, wait and see. It's obviously a results-driven business, and if they end up producing, this is the right move. But it's going to take a little bit for people to understand, where these new coaches fit into place.
And that's just sort of the weird, wild world of college football. Things can change so dramatically year to year. You often attribute stability to having a head coach that's been in place for a while. But Ohio State's assistant coaching staff has had a lot of turnover in the last several years, frankly. I mean, even going back to Urban Meyer in his final year or two, there have been a lot of faces that have come through as coaches, even though Urban Meyer was, a guy that certainly wasn't going anywhere unless it was his own accord. And Ryan Day, you kind of get the same impression. Ryan Day I have a hard time seeing Ryan Day ever being fired unless the Buckeyes, completely implode. I would think that if he doesn't want to be at Ohio State anymore, it would be, on his own accord. This is one of the most wildly successful programs in the country with an incredible recruiting machine that extends beyond any one person. But since we bring up recruiting here, Kerry Coombs was a big part of recruiting. And frankly, so was Al Washington, and I don't want to short Al for that. I understand that Kerry Coombs was offered an opportunity to basically take a lesser role within the program because they didn't want to lose him as a recruiter and because of how much he contributed to this team and to this program during a pretty lengthy, I guess, a lengthy run that had a little hiatus when he went to Tennessee in the middle. I don't know where Kerry's going to end up. He belongs on the sideline for sure. He's a good man. He's a good football coach. He's a hell of a recruiter. And I know it didn't really work out as a defensive coordinator here in Columbus, but man, that guy did a heck of a lot more good than people probably realize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you brought up two, very good points, especially with the amount of turnover they've had. If you remember when Ryan Day came in as head coach, he basically got rid of everybody on defense except for Larry Johnson. So here we are, kind of a reset 3 years later of where they are. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out he did hit a home run on those initial hires, especially with Jeff Hafley, because if you bring him in and he's already on to a head coaching job after a year. So it's not as if they just they didn't hit on everybody in that situation, or it wasn't a good coaching staff to begin with. But as you go further into it, there was deficiencies maybe in recruiting in some places, particularly with Greg Studrawa on offense. And then the linebackers maybe didn't live up to their expectations this year. Al Washington finds his way out. Kerry Coombs always did kind of seem like he was a little bit in over his head in terms of being a play caller, and I think that honestly he would probably admit that it was something new, not something he was used to, and you kind of see what happens when that occurs.
There's a comment here about how the staff change was needed and the defense was embarrassing. Before I address that comment, I suppose just for our listeners who are with us live, thank you. We want you to interact with the show, but if you're listening after the fact, know that we do stream all of our podcasts live on our YouTube channel. We certainly hope you'll subscribe there and interact with us along the way. But these are available on demand after the fact and in a couple different places. Andrew, I don't know if I would say the defense was embarrassing. I would just say that they were young and inexperienced in the beginning of the year, and they made fantastic progress as the season went along. But there were clear deficiencies that got put on full blast. And I think maybe that's the genesis of where that comment was saying it was embarrassing. Yeah, the Michigan game was embarrassing. That was really, really poor. But, I guess I try not to be so prisoner of the moment on a really high or a really low. Let's look at the full body of work and where this team went from the beginning of the season to where they finished up. You're either going to win the national title or you're not. And if you're not going to win the national title, everything should be building toward trying to get that done. And I think the Buckeyes with this group of players are a heck of a lot closer now to where they need to be to compete for a national championship than where they were back in August. And I know there were some growing pains for sure, but not every season is, look, even Alabama, man. I know they've had an incredible run, but they don't win every single year. And they lose a few games along the way. It's not perfect there either. So there has to be an element of watching growth. And I thought Ohio State's defense showed enough progress for me to feel like, okay, the players can make this happen. Tommy Eichenberg, who didn't have one tackle against Tulsa, not one as a starting middle linebacker, had 17 tackles and was the defensive MVP of the Rose Bowl. That is substantial growth throughout the course of the regular season. And whether people want to give them credit or not, Kerry Coombs and Al Washington were a big part of that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the credit for that, I think, it goes to Matt Barnes, who obviously is now the defensive coordinator at Memphis, because prior to that, he wasn't the play caller before the Oregon game. They gave him play calling duties, and it seemed like he was putting the players in the right position to make plays up until the Michigan game, because at the end of the day, you're ultimately judged on wins and losses. And in Ohio State's two biggest games during the regular season, of course, they fell short, and a lot of that had to do with the coaches who didn't put the players in the right position to succeed in those games. Like Michigan, you see offensive line. The offensive line was terrible in that game. Like, there's no way around saying that. And if you're going to assess your team, if Ryan Day sits there and assesses what his team was over the course of the season and how to get that fixed, well, you're going to generally have those same kind of players back. You're going to replace Nicholas Petit-Ferrer with Paris Johnson. There's players that are in these situations where you don't have to necessarily worry about them bringing on new players, and but the difference is it comes down to the coaching putting them in the right position, and it goes that way for defense as a whole, because there's no way around it. You give up 400 plus yards a game, 25 points a game, that doesn't cut it. And if you're not, bringing in those players that are going to be able to do it, it just you need to assess that situation and make something better. And then when you sit there and you watch the national championship on Monday, the linebackers for both teams, especially Georgia, were just flying around. And I can't say that under Al Washington's direction that the linebackers were ever doing that. So it doesn't really necessarily surprise me. And then, like we said, when Noel's coming in, that's his position. Washington was pretty much just the guy out at that point.
Yeah, I agree. The linebackers on Monday night were probably the guys that, even though the Heisman Trophy winner was on the field, I found myself watching Channing Tindall, number 41 and 17, to Kobe Dean, most plays, because they played like madmen. And we saw that a lot throughout the course of the season. If you watched any Georgia football, I'm not sure if you saw it very often against high quality opponents like Alabama. And then obviously in the SEC championship game, they got smoked. And they talked, before this national title game about how they really felt like their conditioning wasn't where it needed to be and how much pride they took over the 37 days between the SEC title game and the national championship game in trying to be a better conditioned team. And it was clear they didn't fatigue in the fourth quarter. In fact, the fourth quarter was the most exciting part of the game. If you watched any of the game, that was probably the part of the game that you remember most. The interception return for touchdown, fine, but there were a couple of other big plays in that quarter that'll really stand out. And there's no doubt anybody that was an Ohio State fan watching that game had to sit there and think to themselves, gee, we've seen silver bullet defenses look really, really good in the past and play a lot like what we're watching here. And we didn't see that enough during the course of the year.
I think a lot of that kind of has to do
addressing one more comment here on being bullied. The comment on, hey, we've never been out toughed in decades of watching Ohio State football. And yeah, that happened a couple of times this year, but I would say on the whole, Ohio State progressed.
Yeah, part of the sticking point, like after the season ended, there was the comments from Michigan's coaching staff about how Ohio State wasn't so physical. That stuck with Ryan Day. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that, because he wasn't going to go into next season and say, I'm trotting out the same coaching staff, the same people to do the same thing. Like, there had to be a change there. And I think that, going back to the Georgia part, like, I think that starts at the top. Like, if you look at who their defensive coordinator was, Lanning, who's now Oregon's head coach, if he's setting that standard of what a Georgia defense should be, that's going to filter down to the players, the assistants, those kind of things. And you really saw it. There was a moment, I believe it was in the fourth quarter, when Alabama nearly scored a touchdown. I think Tindall was out of position. He was kind of caught looking in the backfield. And the middle linebacker came over and was like, what are you doing? Like,
in his face, right in him. Yep.
Very next play, he sacks Bryce Young, and then Alabama settles for a field goal. So it's kind of one of those things. You set the standard up high. You make all the players, play that exact same way as the expectation that you have, and that's just going to filter down. And that's why Georgia won the national championship.
I totally agree. That couple play sequence was among the most memorable parts of the entire game for me, for sure. So look, Ohio State doesn't have to look too far back in program history to know exactly what it takes to win a national championship, especially from a defensive mentality. It's not like they've never done it. It's not like they haven't even done it in that long. The Buckeyes have won a national championship within the past decade, and they've been in the college football playoff several times. So they know what the highest quality competition looks like, and they certainly practice against it each and every day. But it's a new era for the defense. And, I'm not the kind of person that's ever going to badmouth a coach. Certainly wish Kerry Coombs well and Al Washington well as they depart from the program. Man, I've got some friends in coaching, and I'll tell you what, it is a really tough business. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of these guys, I know they get, Ohio State's assistant coaches are largely paid pretty well. A lot of assistant coaches around the country don't make nearly life-changing money. And, it's amazing how last off season, Al Washington's name was the name in the open market, and to turn down a defensive coordinator job at an SEC program that's trying to build something because he wanted to stay in Columbus, to this year. Now he can take any job he wants because he needs a job, or at least he can take any job that he gets an offer for. It's not like Al got worse as a coach over the last 12 months. It's a tough gig, man. It's a tough business. And, best of luck to both Carrie and Al and their families for sure. And same thing with Greg Stadrawa.
Mm-hmm. And I do think that it's just, kind of goes back to the results-driven business. Ohio State just has this expectation. You make 4 straight Big Ten title games, you make it to 2 straight, college or 3 straight college football playoffs. Like there's that expectation that, this is where we want to be, where we need to be. And if we're not there, then things are going to change. And, they're definitely going to land on their feet somewhere. I know that Notre Dame has an opening along the defensive line. I think Al Washington could be, successful there. Kerry Coombs has a history, a very long history down in Cincinnati. He was a big reason why Ohio State was able to kind of have those recruiting inroads down in Southwest Ohio again. So, if Cincinnati, who now conveniently needs a cornerbacks coach, that would be a perfect spot for him. So, I'm not saying that those things are going to happen, but, and you see it a lot, especially in the NFL, coaches get fired left and right and they find some other job, and it's just kind of a recycling of coaches at different positions. So, I don't think that there's any worry that they're going to end up finding some place that they fit into.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Well, let's transition forward here because you referenced the fact Cincinnati's got an opening in their secondary that perhaps Kerry Coombs could go after if he wanted to. But the reason they have that opening is because their secondary coach is coming to Columbus. Perry Eliano is making the trip up I-71 from the Queen City, and he is joining Jim Knowles' staff as the new basically the safeties coach. And the rumor is that Tim Walton, who is a former Buckeye, is going to leave the Jacksonville Jaguars and come to Columbus to basically coach the Ohio State secondary. You'll have 2 coaches there in the secondary between the two. Well, let's start with Perry. I mean, if you watched any Cincinnati football this year, it was either Desmond Ridder or it was the secondary that really impressed you, specifically in Sauce Gardner, and Perry Eliano was a big part of that. Everybody's had lulls and everybody's had highs in their career, but this guy seems to be a high energy guy that could fit in well here.
Yeah, and if the last 2 years are any indication, there's definitely going to be a dramatic improvement in Ohio State secondary just based upon, his history. In addition to Sauce Gardner, which, is a fantastic nickname. I don't know where he necessarily got that nickname from, but, I hope that if Perry was the reason that kind of existed, that he can kind of bring something like that to Ohio State. But, not only Sauce Gardner, but then Kobe Bryant as well, the younger brother of former Ohio State safety Christian Bryant. So, I think that it's kind of one of those things. You see what he did there at a lesser school. Those kids weren't necessarily highly recruited, or maybe Kobe would have ended up at Ohio State, for example, like his brother. So he's turning those players into All-Americans, potential first-round draft picks, the American Defensive Player of the Year, those kind of things. So there is a history there of him having produced results, and like I said, that's really only a positive thing for Ohio State. And really, when I first saw the name, to me, that's a home run hire. You're finding somebody who is, on the upswing, clearly has results, and that can infuse something new to your program.
He'll be working alongside, we expect, Tim Walton, who Urban Meyer had retained from the previous coaching staff in Jacksonville. Tim Walton had been on the Jacksonville staff starting in 2019, but he's had a long journey as a coach. Starting all the way back in 1995 when he was a graduate assistant at Bowling Green. He coached the running backs and defensive backs for Bowling Green up until 1999. Spent the next 2 years coaching DBs at Memphis. He was the defensive backs coach at Syracuse. He was the defensive backs coach in 2003 at LSU. And then he made the move to Miami, coached defensive backs 04 through 06. Defensive coordinator in 2007. He went back to Memphis as a defensive coordinator in 2008. He's got a ton of experience there. And then in the NFL, jumped to the Detroit Lions. He coached for the Rams. He coached for the Giants. And then the Jaguars. He was a defensive coordinator for the St. Louis Rams in 2013. And now is reportedly coming back to Ohio State. So this is a guy with a boatload of experience. Was a captain his senior year at Ohio State, and somebody that I think the Buckeyes are hoping, maybe beyond just the wealth of experience that he has. He knows what it's like to play in Ohio Stadium. He knows what it's like to be an important role on the team as a captain, and to try to maybe reinstill some of that tenacity for the Silver Bullets, I think is important for Ryan Day.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head right there too, because I think what he might lack in recruiting experience. Not he hasn't been a college coach for 13, 14 years, so he doesn't necessarily know that side of the business. But on the other hand, he knows what it means to be a Buckeye. I've heard that he still talks about his experiences at Ohio State and what that meant to him and how that drove him to become the person he is. And I think especially in today's recruiting world, where you have to not only recruit high school kids, but you have to also keep players on your roster because
Absolutely.
of transfer portal, NIL, all that stuff. He's kind of that guy who will keep those kids around and say, you know what, this is what it meant to have a degree from Ohio State. This is what it meant to me to play for this university. I want to instill that same thing upon you. And then on top of that, he has a different style of teaching that he'll be able to bring in, and hopefully that'll produce results as well. So at the end of the day, he's going to have to learn the recruiting part of it on the fly. But I think that just him being a Buckeye, having that experience, being a team captain is something that's completely invaluable.
There were two other guys that are reportedly being brought onto Ohio State staff, but neither of them will be on the sideline on game day. And both of them came from Oklahoma State and were with Jim Knowles. And those two guys are Michael Hunter, who played at both Indiana and Oklahoma State, and Coy McFarland. McFarland is the son of longtime college assistant coach and brief head coach at Stephen F. Austin, Robert McFarland. And he played Division II college football down at Arkansas Monticello. I look at that and say, okay, that's fine. That's nice. But they're guys that Jim Knowles knows and clearly trusts, and he's bringing them with them. They're not in decision-making power spots. They're not going to be in big money coaching spots. But if Jim Knowles has taken over this job and it's, he's running the defense, it's his show, and he's got guys that he trusts, and he had a great product this past year, good by me. It's a good start.
Yeah, I think that's important to have those guys come in and, kind of install the, everything that comes with Knowles coming in and bringing his system and those kind of things. It's a lot very much like Tanner McAllister coming in for 1 year at safety. He's going to be a vital part of that defense just from a play standpoint, but then also for, kind of being that defensive, signal caller, if you will, and say, hey, I know how this works. I've been with Jim Knowles for several years now. This is where you need to be. And I think these guys are going to be the exact same way. Hunter obviously is a little bit, green behind the ears, like in terms of, his experience, because he was only there since March after having a journeyman NFL career for a couple years. But McFarland on the other hand, I think it's very important that he comes in because he coached Oklahoma State's linebackers in the Fiesta Bowl when Knowles wasn't there because, like we said, Knowles coaches the linebackers as well. So, and he performed really well. I know there was a lot of people that were saying after the Fiesta Bowl that, he should be their new linebackers coach moving forward or have, an increased role. So to get him away from them, I know Mike Gundy is probably not real happy right now.
Probably not. Mike Gundy is Mike Gundy is one of the real characters in college football, and he's had great stability. He's one of the longest tenured coaches at any school right now consistently. I think it's pretty much him and Kirk Ferentz and Utah and Coach Whittingham. Those are I'm pretty sure those are the three longest tenured head coaches at their respective institutions in the FBS. And you're right. Mike Gundy probably feels like his cupboard was just robbed in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Hopefully it works for Ohio State, but I like the start.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, like you said, it's not necessarily about the on-field, them having roles in that. It's more about practice and, getting guys to understand, like, this is the program that we are. And, we're going to find out what roles they have. So, they might be more involved than what we think. I know Hunter was only a grad assistant in his first year, whereas McFarland was, a quality control coach. So, the roles are a little bit different and those kind of things. But yeah, I mean, any situation where you can bring in guys who already know the system, that's only going to help.
I did think the timing of this was a little strange because, the early enrollees are on campus as of this past weekend because Monday started the spring semester. Um, I have to imagine that Al Washington and Kerry Coombs were probably taken a little bit by surprise. Maybe that's a bad assumption on my part, but I suppose when you get this far away from the last game of the season, which was now basically a full 2 weeks ago, the recruiting that they did in that time between the Rose Bowl and the national championship game, and with the semester starting and a lot of the guys that they recruited coming on campus, and now all of a sudden, they're gone. I can't confirm that, but I would anticipate that, their dismissal probably caught them off guard. So I guess I was a little bit eyebrows raised, this morning when the news came out. But it is what it is. And I think the Buckeyes, you're paying Ryan Day big bucks to make this thing go right. And, he deserves every benefit of the doubt right now, because even though it was, a frustrating end of the season when Ohio State didn't even make it to the Big Ten championship game and they lost to Michigan, he still only lost 4 games in 3 years. And it's, 33-4 or 34-4 is his record. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt for a little while.
Yeah, I mean, I think there has to be those conversations. I don't think you want to start out the beginning of a kid's career on a bad note by not telling them exactly what's going to go on. I know that some of the offensive linemen, when they were down at the All-American Bowl, they admitted that they were a little bit surprised by Stud's departure, but at the same time, at the end of the day, it's still Ohio State. They still have the same opportunity, and if they trust in Ryan Day like they're supposed to, the guy who is supposed to be their head coach for their entire career, they're going to trust that he's doing the right thing to put them in a position to succeed. And if at the end of the day, if that's what's happening, then I don't think that they necessarily have an issue with the fact that, their position coach is gone. Like it sucks to not have that relationship, but at the same time, if you had a good relationship, you're still going to have a relationship with this person, regardless of whether they're coaching you or not. And at the end of the day, as long as you're put into a position that you're going to, be at your best to succeed and move forward, they're not going to have an issue with that.
Yeah, I agree for sure. Any final thoughts on that before we kind of turn our attention to the schedule?
Nope.
Okay. Yeah, I think we covered that pretty well. So the Buckeyes, I think they're done making staff changes. I guess you never know for sure, but Justin Fry on the offensive line, and then two new coaches. One that is being reported is done in Perry Eliano, and then one that is rumored to be the leading candidate, but the expectation is that Tim Walton would be coming to Columbus. So that's what we're expecting, and we'll certainly share more information with you along the way as we learn it. In the meantime, I'll share the screen here so that you can have a chance to see the schedule, just in case you haven't already for some reason. But in the meantime, the Buckeyes, look, they knew what their schedule was going to be, and I don't think this is a huge surprise. Let me get rid of the line in the middle of the screen for you here. Probably not a huge surprise, but all of these, conference games that were shifted around a little bit. I wasn't surprised that, the first 3 are locked in contractually. Those are going to stay. And you kind of know that the Michigan game is not going to get moved out of the last game of the regular season. Everything else is probably, could be moved around a little bit. I don't know if I would use the word surprise. I think for me, it was more like, we got to open Big Ten play with Wisconsin. I don't know if I love that. Not that Michigan State was, an easy game, but I guess I would have rather played Michigan State than Wisconsin in the first Big Ten game of the year.
Well, I think the important thing to remember, though, is what followed the Michigan State game. And it would have both been road games, too. So you would have opened the Big Ten play with at Michigan State, which isn't necessarily always the easiest. I think if you remove the 52-12 game during the pandemic, shortened season, every time they played up there, it's generally been pretty close in the last 10 years. And then obviously Penn State is never easy to go to, whether it's the beginning of October or the end of October. That definitely is a difficult stretch. So I think that, to be honest, I would trade the home game against Wisconsin in a heartbeat instead of having two straight back-to-back games against Michigan State and Penn State, especially with how well Michigan State played this past year as well.
That's an interesting take. I can see where you'd feel that way. To me, it's going to be a little weird opening the year with 5 consecutive games at home. The Buckeyes don't have a single road game till October 8th. I mean, that's pretty unusual. Even when you have, your non-conference games all at the front of the schedule and all at home, typically you don't start 5 straight at home without a bye. So we're going to get real used to the friendly confines of the shoe and then have to kind of split the time the rest of the way.
I'd say once you get to the open week, in October, then it's kind of, there's the Penn State game and the Northwestern game back to back. They go from 3 of 4 weeks on the road, kind of with Michigan at the end there. So, that'll be a difficult stretch just because, you get kind of used to being at home and then to have to go on the road and, kind of alternate, like you said, that makes it a little bit different. So it definitely seems it's very home heavy in the front and then, very road heavy toward the back.
If you're watching our live stream of our podcast, you can certainly see the schedule. But in case you're listening to an audio only stream after the fact, I'll run through the schedule real quick for you. Season still open September 3rd against Notre Dame at home with Marcus Freeman and James Laurinaitis and company coming to town. The Buckeyes will host Arkansas State and Toledo the following 2 weeks to wrap up their non-conference play. Big Ten play opens up September 24th against Wisconsin instead of on the road at Michigan State. October 1st is now a home game for the 5th straight week. Buckeyes have Rutgers. They'll be they were originally at Penn State. Ohio State's first road game will be October the 8th. They'll go up to East Lansing and play Michigan State, and that will basically wrap up the first half of the season. The bye week for the Buckeyes has shifted forward a week. So Ohio State is now idle on October 15th. And then moving forward the rest of the season, Ohio State will open the second half at home against Iowa. So they've got an extra week to prepare for and get healthy for a team that obviously the last time they played the Hawkeyes is a frustrating and difficult memory for Ohio State fans. After Iowa, the Buckeyes will be at Penn State and at Northwestern in back-to-back weeks. They'll come home for Indiana on November 12th before the final 2 games of the regular season stayed put as originally scheduled. They'll go to College Park and play Maryland and then host the Michigan Wolverines. So that's the schedule for 2022. Again, same opponents, same venues. None of the, Ohio State was not originally scheduled to be at one school and now hosting that school. None of that has changed. It's just playing opponents on different dates than they originally were. So not any substantial changes in that way. And I think we're going to see this for the next couple of years, right? I mean, this the complicated scheduling involved with the 2022 pandemic, I think is going to force us to have a breaking news story each year on, hey, guess what? The new schedule is out.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of surprised to see if you go back to the 2020 original schedule, they were supposed to play at Illinois, and I know that game got canceled as well once they went down to the 8-game season. So I was actually kind of surprised to see that they didn't swap Northwestern for Illinois. But I think it's kind of one of those things that once they finally announced and said, like, hey, we're going to adjust these because they have the schedule out through 2025 already, like the full Big Ten schedule. So, I think it's just going to be kind of a moving thing. It's going to be difficult. I think that's what kind of confuses me about it is you're never going to make it perfect. Like, you kind of just at that point have to move on and say, you know what, we're all Big Ten schools. We're going to eventually play each other at some point in time. And it just seems to me like it's kind of just trying to make everybody happy and make up for games that got canceled. And to me, that's almost more complicated than it needs to be. But I mean, I'm not Kevin Warren, and I don't have to deal with it other than to write this story. So I'm not going to complain. But I think there's a really important thing in there too. I know it seems very inconsequential to move Ohio State's open date to a week earlier, but I was also off that week, so that kind of sets up a game where they're both coming into it rested, and that could be a very good game. I think it would be very different if Ohio State was going into that a week earlier, something like that, or having a game a week earlier and Iowa doesn't. That's kind of not necessarily something you want to walk into.
Yeah, totally agree there. It's nice that both teams will be off a bye on the same week. I guess the only other thing I wanted to throw out here, there's been a lot of comments about the team up north in our comments section here on the live stream. There's been a lot of rumors about Jim Harbaugh to the NFL, particularly possibly to your favorite team out there in Las Vegas, Andrew. I have to imagine that's kind of a weird sore spot for you. Look, the Raiders are in the playoffs, right? I mean, they're not going to make decisions on what their coaching staff's going to look like next year until their playoff run is done, which could be as soon as a couple days from now, or it could be, several weeks from now when you're riding in a parade float and a Super Bowl parade. I bring that all up to say that I'm curious if you think that the Jim Harbaugh to the NFL rumors may be done, considering that Coach Harbaugh just convinced Mike Elston to leave a job that he had for a long time at Notre Dame and did a really good job with, to come up and basically, take that job and coaching the defensive line now for Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the conversation of him possibly going back to the NFL is a very real thing. If you think about it, like, he's coming off the best season of his time at Michigan, beat Ohio State, went to the playoff, won the Big Ten. Like, you're not going to find your stock very much higher as a head coach, whether that you want to go to the NFL or get yourself a pay raise. I know that possibly was part of it too. There's nothing like an agent floating, hey, my client's interested in these two NFL openings. He just took a massive pay cut last year, and then performed well. You guys should up my salary or his salary. I mean, I guess the agent would be making a hefty portion of said salary too, but I think that the conversation is real. He had success in the NFL too. He reached a Super Bowl. It wasn't like he was a bad coach there. And I personally think that he is a better NFL coach than he is a college coach. So that is all real. At the end of the day, though, like you said, it was very similar to comments about Ryan Day being, a candidate for the Bears job as well. He's not going to make all these moves if he's going to the Bears. Like, that's just not a realistic thing. So, if Harbaugh is making a move like that, and that's a really good move for them as a defensive line coach. Like, he was there at Notre Dame for a long time, produced very many, NFL players, had a lot of success there. And, for them to poach somebody from a name brand like Notre Dame, that's significant in itself. So, I think that is definitely indicative of him staying. And I think that, he's kind of seeing what Ohio State is doing too, and upping their game. So, he needs to respond, the same way.
Totally agree. It'll be very interesting to follow that. But I thought that was a pretty notable hire. And for as excited as Michigan fans seem to be that he's coming on board, I know Notre Dame fans are bummed that Coach Elston is leaving South Bend because he's done a really good job there. All right. I think that kind of wraps up the coaching and schedule news here, at least for this afternoon. I guess you never really know if more news is going to come down the pipe, but what we anticipate for next year is that Ohio State's offensive coaching staff is going to consist of Ryan Day in his typical spot, coaching the quarterbacks and calling the offense. Obviously, the promotion for Brian Hartline to passing game coordinator, he's going to have a much bigger role in developing the game plan for the offense, considering what he's done. Just an incredible job with Ohio State's wide receivers. Tony Alford back as the running backs coach. He's done a terrific job mentoring a young group, and certainly Travion Henderson had a great year. Justin Fry, the new offensive line coach for the Buckeyes. We've talked about him before, obviously coming in as a coach from UCLA. If you're unfamiliar, he was both the offensive line coach and the offensive coordinator for Chip Kelly's UCLA Bruins this past year. Then on the defensive side of the ball, I guess we haven't been told otherwise, but I think it's safe to assume at the moment, maybe we shouldn't assume anything, but Larry Johnson appears to be the defensive line coach moving forward, with Jim Knowles as the new defensive coordinator coming in and coaching the linebackers. Perry Eliano will have some work in the safeties, and the secondary coach we expect is going to be Tim Walton, coming back to Ohio State where he played about 3 decades ago. And I don't think we're going to have any changes on the special teams side, so maybe Parker Fleming will stay put for the Buckeyes there as well. So coaching staff changes, a few additions in the transfer portal, and now it's time for the Buckeyes to get to work and try to figure out a way to make sure that what happened on November 27th this past year does not happen on November 26th this upcoming season. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's important to remember, too, that the transfer portal is a year-round thing. So I wouldn't quite shut the door on any more additions. I know that, you know, any team that's going to be in contention for a national championship is always going to want to, you know, find other players that they think can help improve them, whether it's, you know, a starting player or even some depth, because at the end of the day, you know, especially at linebacker, like even adding one transfer, they were still only at 6 scholarship players last year at that position. And I know they have a class full of, you know, 2, quite possibly 3 if Sonny Styles, you know, continues to grow physically, you know, that they bring in a very important and very great class at that position. But I think, you know, and even if you know, they might not come in immediately and make an impact. So you're always looking for those instant impact transfer players, and they're definitely plenty out there. So, you know, the offseason is a 365, well, football is a 365-day thing a year. So
it absolutely is, and you just never know when the next shoe is going to drop. Plenty of continuing coverage of all the latest breaking news for Ohio State football and basketball over on BuckeyesNow.com. Certainly encourage you to check us out there. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Turn on those notifications so you'll know when we're live. We love interacting with you. We had a lot of really good comments tonight, several of which we were able to address, and would love to have you a part of the show if you're willing to. So please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Our accounts are at BuckeyesNow SI. Hope to see you soon. For Andrew Lind, I'm Brendan Gulick. Thanks for joining us on Buckeye Breakdown. Ohio State football with several changes on the coaching staff. Let's hope that they're good ones. We've got the whole crew together as we cover Ohio State with our instant analysis from Ohio State.
There's something that doesn't feel right.
Unbelievable effort from him today. Is E.J. Liddell going to crack the first team All Big Ten?
I think he can be the guy. I'm not trying to start a quarterback controversy.
He seems to have the durability. He certainly has the toughness. This is the question on a lot of people's minds here. Welcome to Buckeye Breakdown.